a glamorous private jet, a night of luxury in the sky, when a jealous lover suddenly reaches over and yanks a pregnant wife's hair, humiliating her in front of everyone. The husband sides with the lover, convinced that no one can stop him. But what he doesn't know is that his own billionaire brother is on board. What happens next isn't just a betrayal. It's a brutal clash of arrogance, truth, and unstoppable justice. And trust me, you won't believe how this flight ends until we get into the story. Tell us what time you're watching and where you're joining us from, and leave a comment below so we can hear you. The low hum of the engines filled the cabin, a constant vibration that usually lulled passengers into a state of calm. Tonight, it felt different. The private jet gleamed with luxury, from the perfectly polished leather seats to the champagne bottles chilling in silver buckets. A faint aroma of expensive perfume hung in the air, mixed with the subtle scent of aviation fuel that clung to every flight. The scene should have been elegant and peaceful. Instead, it was about to ignite. She sat near the window, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. The pregnant wife, a woman named Claire, wore a silk maternity dress in pale blue, chosen for comfort, but still shimmering under the cabin lights. Her eyes shifted from the glass of sparkling water in her hand to the reflection of her husband, Ethan, laughing a little too loudly with the woman beside him. That woman, the mistress, Jade, had blonde curls, a crimson dress, and a mocking smile painted on her face. For the past hour, whispers had rippled through the jet. Some of the husband's business associates tried to bury themselves in their laptops, pretending not to notice a thing. A couple of flight attendants exchanged glances, sensing the tension building row by row. Claire sat rigid, her heart pounding, her throat tight. Every one of Jade's words was a thrown dagger, meant to humiliate her in front of the small, trapped audience in this flying palace. Suddenly, the moment came. Jade leaned forward, her perfectly manicured hand reaching out. She grabbed a handful of Claire's long, dark hair and pulled hard, so hard that Claire let out a small, strangled cry. The sound cut through the steady hum of the engines like a shriek in a cathedral. Claire's head snapped to the side, a jolt of sharp pain shooting down her neck. Her glass slipped from her fingers, spilling water into her lap. Every single person's eyes turned instantly. The cabin froze. Someone whispered, "Oh my God!" The clinking of ice in a champagne glass stopped mid-motion. A businessman dropped his pen, which clattered on the floor, sounding louder than normal in the sudden silence. Jade smiled coldly, still holding that handful of hair. "Do you honestly think you belong here?" Her voice dripped with contempt, sharp enough to cut the air. Claire struggled to get free, one hand on her belly, her lips trembling. She couldn't scream too loud. She knew every sudden jerk could disrupt the fragile heartbeat inside her. Her eyes filled with tears of pain, but she pressed her lips together to hold back a sob. For one long second, no one moved. Ethan didn't get up to protect her. He leaned back, his arm resting lazily on the armrest, as if he were enjoying the show. His cold indifference was even more cutting than the mistress's pull. Claire's vision blurred with tears. She could see her reflection in the polished window, hair pulled, body bent, dignity ripped away in front of everyone. The shame burned in her chest. Outside, the world was an endless night, stars scattered like indifferent witnesses. Inside, the humiliation was on fire under artificial lights. A flight attendant finally took a nervous step forward, but hesitated. Jade gave a sharp tug, forcing Claire's head down before roughly letting go. Claire collapsed back against the seat, her breath coming in ragged gasps, cheeks streaked with tears. The silence that followed wasn't calm. It was charged, heavy, vibrating with unspoken judgment. Cameras flashed. A passenger had raised their phone in a trembling hand, recording the scene. The red recording light blinked, proof that the assault hadn't gone unnoticed. Claire closed her eyes, her heart hammering. The world seemed to tilt, the plane itself shaking slightly in the turbulence. And in that moment, when her dignity seemed lost and her spirit nearly broken, a new presence stirred in the back of the cabin. What no one knew yet was that 27 minutes earlier, the course of this flight had already changed. The cabin was thick with tension. The air no longer carried the soft hum of wealth and leisure. It was now heavy with disbelief. Moments ago, polite laughter and conversations had floated between the rows of seats. Now, everything was shattered. Jade leaned back in her chair with a satisfied smile, her red lips curved in triumph. The pregnant wife, Claire, hugged her belly and tried to steady her breathing. Her body trembled as she brought shaky fingers to her scalp, where the hair had been ripped out. The strands still tingled from the brutal tug. Her skin burned where tears of humiliation had left hot trails down her cheeks. She blinked hard, but her eyes clouded over again, her vision a salty, shameful blur. Her silk dress was soaked from the spilled water, dark splotches spreading across the pale blue fabric, making her look bruised in front of everyone. The passengers didn't know what to do. A middle-aged bloke in a suit adjusted his tie and cleared his throat, but the sound came out too loud and clumsy. A woman with pearls clutched her handbag tighter, as if the violence might jump from one row to the next. One of the flight attendants rushed over with a towel, her hands shaking so badly the fabric fell to the floor. The only sound was the soft murmur of the engines, and, faintly, the gentle clink of ice in a forgotten glass. Claire looked up. Mascara ran down her cheeks, streaking in dark rivers against her pale skin. Her lips trembled, but she didn't speak. The silence that followed her suffering was more cutting than the attack itself. Her gaze swept over the faces, looking for a flash of sympathy, a whisper of compassion. Some of the guests looked away, ashamed, while others stared openly, unable to process what they had just witnessed. Then came the whispers, at first soft, almost like the rustle of fabric, then louder as courage grew. "She just pulled her hair. My God, she's pregnant, and he's just sitting there." The murmurs grew into a storm of judgment sweeping through the cabin. Heads shook, phones were held higher, capturing shaky footage in the cabin light. Some passengers covered their mouths, stunned that such cruelty could happen in such a confined and public space. Claire tried to stand. Her knees buckled, her body still weak with shock, and she sank back into her seat. Her hand pressed hard against her stomach, protecting the child within from the chaos outside. A tear slipped from the corner of her eye, slid down her chin, and fell silently onto her dress. She whispered quietly, almost too soft to hear, "Please, let my baby be safe." In a corner of the cabin, a champagne flute slipped from a nervous hand. It fell to the carpet and shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces. The sharp crack of breaking glass cut through the silence like a bolt of lightning in a storm. Gasps, quick and horrified, went around the room. A woman clutched her pearls tighter, and another passenger put a hand to their mouth. The sound made everything real. It was no longer a scene that could be ignored. Jade laughed softly, brushing a golden curl from her face. She leaned back, crossing her legs, the crimson fabric of her dress glowing under the overhead lights. Her arrogance filled the cabin, daring anyone to confront her. Claire remained still, her body curled in on itself. She stared at the floor where the glass had broken, the scattered fragments like the pieces of her pride. For a moment she felt as fragile as those shards, ready to be crushed under careless steps. And yet, deep down, beneath the pain and humiliation, something stirred. It wasn't strength yet. It wasn't defiance. But it was the beginning of a spark that refused to be extinguished. The cameras kept rolling, red lights blinking silently in the corners of the cabin. And though Ethan still hadn't moved to her side, the world outside this jet would soon see everything. The silence lingered, heavy and uncomfortable, until finally Ethan leaned forward. His expression wasn't one of concern for his pregnant wife. It was charged with irritation, as if her pain was an inconvenience. He looked around the cabin, at the murmuring passengers and the blinking cameras, and raised his voice. "Everyone just calm down," he said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow in the tense air. "You're making this into something it isn't." Claire's eyes widened in disbelief. She pressed her hand harder against her belly, the betrayal burning hotter than the pain on her scalp. She searched his face for a sign of compassion, a flicker of the man she thought she had married. But his gaze slid past her, landing on Jade, who sat with her arms crossed and her lips curved in satisfaction. "She's overreacting," he continued, nodding toward his wife. "Women get sensitive when they're pregnant. Hormones, stress, you know how it is." His tone was condescending, as if he were giving the passengers a lecture rather than defending his wife. A low murmur ran through the cabin. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A man shook his head and muttered, "Unbelievable." A woman clutched her handbag tighter, disgust etched on her face. Still, Ethan went on, either oblivious or refusing to notice. Claire took a shaky breath. She whispered, "How can you say that after what she did to me?" Her voice was small and trembling, but clear enough for those closest to hear. Ethan turned on her sharply, his eyes narrowed to slits. "Don't make a scene," he snapped. "You've embarrassed yourself enough." Gasps went around the cabin. A young passenger in the back held her phone higher, recording every word. The red recording light blinked, a silent witness to his cruelty. Jade moved, feigning innocence. She leaned against him, resting a hand on his arm in a show of intimacy. "She always twists things," she said loudly, contempt dripping from every word. "You all saw it. She provoked me." The passengers looked at each other, disbelief on their faces. No one had seen provocation. They had seen a pregnant woman assaulted in plain sight, but Jade, emboldened by her husband's protection, wore her arrogance like a shield. Claire trembled, her hands on her belly. She wanted to speak, to scream the truth, but her throat was closing up. Her husband's words echoed in her ears. Sensitive, hormones, overreacting. Each word ripped another piece of dignity from her. Ethan raised his chin, scanning the cabin with an air of authority. "I will not let this become a circus," he declared. "We're fine. My wife is fine. She should be grateful to have me to handle situations like this." The passengers didn't respond. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others stared at him with open disbelief. A businessman muttered, "He's protecting the wrong person." The flight attendant who had dropped the towel earlier picked it up with still shaking hands. She walked to Claire in silence and placed the cloth in her lap with a look of mute compassion. It was a small gesture, but Claire felt it like a lifeline. Someone, at least, saw her suffering. Her husband ignored it. He leaned back in his seat, pulling Jade closer. She rested her head on his shoulder, flashing a victorious smile to the rows of passengers who were now unwilling witnesses. Claire sat in silence, her cheeks streaked with tears and her body heavy with despair. But deep down, beneath the shame and sadness, another feeling began to surface. It was faint, fragile, but it was there. The growing awareness that she was utterly alone in her marriage, that the man beside her had chosen cruelty over compassion, and that truth would change everything. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every gesture, every careless word. Outside the sealed cabin of the jet, the world waited. And they would soon see the man who defended the mistress while abandoning his wife. The jet sliced smoothly through the night sky. But inside the cabin, the atmosphere was far from peaceful. The husband had already made his choice, standing firmly by the woman who had just humiliated his pregnant wife. Now, the mistress leaned forward, her body language radiating triumph. She slowly crossed her legs, letting the crimson fabric of her dress gleam under the cabin lights, and looked directly at any passenger who dared to stare. Her lips curled into a sharp, mocking smile. "You all saw it," she said, her voice loud enough to fill the cabin. "He's with me, not her." She tilted her chin towards the pregnant wife, as if dismissing her entirely. The words cut through the silence, leaving Claire trembling in her seat. Jade raised her hand and slowly turned her wrist. A diamond ring flashed under the lights, bigger than any Claire had ever worn. She held it up for all to see, catching the light until it glinted like a weapon. "Do you know who gave me this?" she asked, pausing just long enough to let the attention build. "He did. He promised me everything, and unlike her, I know how to keep his attention." Gasps went through the cabin. Some passengers whispered in disbelief. Others shook their heads, disgust etched on their faces. Still, Jade reveled in their reactions, mistaking shock for admiration. She leaned closer to the husband, her shoulder brushing his in a gesture of intimacy, her smile widening as if she had just claimed her territory for the world to see. Claire's hands trembled in her lap. She pulled at the damp fabric of her dress, trying to smooth it, trying to hold on to a shred of dignity. Her eyes burned, but she refused to let more tears fall. Every word from Jade was a blade, but her husband's silence hurt even more. Jade wasn't finished. She pulled her designer phone from her handbag and, with a flick of her finger, opened a photo gallery, turning the screen for the nearby passengers to see. The images glowed with scenes of intimate holidays, candlelit dinners, luxurious trips that should have belonged to a wife and had been stolen by another. "Look at this," she said proudly. "Him and me in Paris, him and me in Santorini, him and me in the villa in Italy. Do you think he would take her somewhere like that?" Claire closed her eyes, her chest rising and falling in ragged breaths, her stomach clenched with fear and sadness. She whispered silently to the child within her, begging for strength, for protection, to survive this storm of shame. The passengers shifted uncomfortably. A man near the aisle murmured, "This is just cruel." A woman next to him nodded, her lips a thin, tight line. Jade heard, but instead of softening, she laughed, a sharp sound that rang like breaking glass. "Cruel? No. This is reality. Men choose the women who make them feel alive. That's why he chose me. It was the now." The husband said nothing. He let her words hang in the air, his silence serving as confirmation. Passengers looked at him, waiting for a denial, waiting for a shred of decency. But he only adjusted his cufflinks as if nothing of importance had been said. Claire looked down, her voice barely a whisper. "You're humiliating me." But her words were drowned out by Jade's laughter. The phones kept going up, recording every moment. Red lights blinked, capturing the arrogance, the cruelty, and the betrayal with perfect clarity. Jade reveled in the attention, not realizing that the very evidence she was showing off would soon be her undoing. In that cabin high above the clouds, the mistress thought she was untouchable. She thought she had won, but she didn't yet know who else was watching, who else was listening, and how quickly the tide was about to turn. The mistress's arrogant laughter still echoed in the cabin when the husband finally moved in his seat. His face was flushed, not with shame, but with irritation at the murmuring spreading around him. He could hear the passengers whispering, he could see the looks of disapproval, and it pricked his pride like needles. He huffed, squared his shoulders, and raised his voice to regain control of the room. "That's enough!" he snapped. His voice carried the weight of authority, the same tone he used in boardrooms to silence subordinates. He scanned the rows of seats, daring anyone to object. "You saw a private matter, nothing more. And if anyone here thinks they can interfere, they'll regret it." The passengers stiffened. Some lowered their phones, afraid of drawing attention, but others kept recording in silence. With hands firm despite the threats, Claire remained still, hugging her belly, her eyes fixed on the floor. She had lived with that tone before, the cold voice that chipped away at her confidence. Hearing it now, in front of strangers, made her tremble. Still, she remained silent, unwilling to provoke him further in such a vulnerable state. Ethan turned his gaze on her, his eyes narrowed to slits. "And you," he said with venom, "don't you dare play the victim. You know better than anyone that I hold your future in my hands. One call from me, and your accounts are frozen. Your cards stop working. You and your unborn child will have nothing." Gasps went through the cabin. A woman in the back shook her head, whispering to the man next to her. How can he talk to her like that? The man only muttered, "He's drunk on his own power." Jade leaned in, smiling maliciously, as if the cruelty pleased her. She whispered loud enough for others to hear. "Let her cry. She has no idea how replaceable she is." Claire shivered. Her lips trembled as if to speak, but her voice was caught in her throat. She pressed her palm harder against her stomach, feeling the reassuring rhythm of life inside her, holding on against the storm of humiliation. Ethan raised a hand, gesturing to the flight attendants. "If she continues with this nonsense, I'll have her moved to the back of the plane. She'll sit alone until we land." His words cracked like a whip. The flight attendants froze, caught between their duty to him and their compassion for Claire. Their eyes showed discomfort, but their bodies remained rigid, waiting for direction. The passengers, however, were no longer silent. Voices rose in protest. "She's pregnant," a man said firmly. "You can't treat her like that." A woman added, "This is abuse, plain and simple." Ethan's face turned red with rage. He pointed a finger at them, his voice thundering. "Keep your opinions to yourselves. None of you know who you're dealing with. I own companies that can destroy your lives in an instant. Do you think your little recordings will matter? I can buy silence. I can erase stories. I have friends in every corner of the media." Jade laughed again, leaning into him, as if his threats were proof of his power. She raised her champagne glass in a mocking toast to the stunned passengers. Claire closed her eyes. Every word was like another chain tightening, but deep inside, something shifted. The humiliation was unbearable, but it was also revealing. She understood now, in a painful and complete way, that his love had never been protection. It had always been possession. The passengers exchanged glances. The phones were still held up, their red lights blinking, capturing every vile threat. Ethan believed his power extended into the skies, but he didn't realize his arrogance had already sealed his downfall. And in that fragile silence after his outburst, the cabin seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for a force greater than his cruelty to finally break through. The air inside the cabin was thick, almost suffocating. The passengers were silent, their eyes shifting between the husband, the mistress, and the trembling wife. The husband's threats still echoed, but it was the mistress who struck next. She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with malicious delight, and decided that words were no longer enough. With a sudden flick of her wrist, the mistress grabbed a champagne flute from the table and threw it at Claire. The golden liquid cascaded over the pregnant woman's face and chest, soaking the pale blue silk of her dress. Droplets rolled down her skin, mixing with the tears that had not yet dried. The impact of the cold liquid made her gasp, instinctively hugging her belly. A collective cry of outrage erupted from the passengers. "Stop it!" a woman yelled. "She's pregnant!" Another voice echoed, "Someone stop this!" Phones were held higher, cameras capturing the cruelty in every detail. Claire stood motionless for a moment, stunned by the assault. Her wet dress clung to her body, outlining the curve of her belly, the life within her. Her cheeks burned with humiliation, but her spirit fought to stay upright. She raised a trembling hand to wipe her face, her eyes filled with a mixture of despair and determination. Jade smiled proudly, as if she had just won a prize. She turned to the husband and muttered with satisfaction, "She looks pathetic, you have to admit. You never should have married her." Her voice carried across the cabin, cruelly deliberate, designed to shred what little dignity remained. The husband didn't rebuke her. He didn't move to help. He simply nodded, his lips twisted into a sneer. "She was never strong enough," he muttered, just loud enough for those closest to hear. "Always weak, always clingy." Gasps went through the cabin again, sharper this time, mixed with murmurs of disgust. A man near the aisle whispered in a voice filled with rage, "This is beyond the pale." His wife nodded, holding her phone steady as the recording continued. The pregnant wife finally found her voice, at first trembling, fragile, after hours of silence, but strong enough to rise above the noise. "You are humiliating me in front of everyone," she cried. "And for what? To protect a woman who despises me, who despises the child I carry." Her words broke over the cabin like thunder. The passengers leaned forward, their faces etched with sympathy and fury. Jade only laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that bounced off the polished walls of the jet. "You're humiliating yourself," she spat. "You were never enough for him. You never will be." Claire's shoulders trembled. Her chest rose and fell in ragged breaths. Her voice trembled again, but there was strength in that tremble. "They may take my dignity tonight," she said, "but they cannot erase who I am, and they cannot erase the truth." The cabin fell silent. For the first time, Jade wavered. Her smile faltered, unsure under the weight of those words. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his sneer cracking as he noticed the red recording lights blinking from multiple angles, capturing every word, every taunt, every cruel laugh. A passenger, unable to remain silent, stood and yelled, "This is abuse! We won't let it be hidden!" Others nodded, some clapping softly in solidarity with Claire. The tide in the cabin was turning. Claire sank back into her seat, soaked and trembling, but her eyes no longer showed only shame. Now they held a fire. The humiliation had been unbearable, but it had also drawn a line, and as the cameras kept rolling, that line was now visible for the world to see. Jade, oblivious to how close her arrogance was to bringing her to ruin, leaned back with another smug smile. She believed she had completely broken her rival, not knowing that her cruelty had awakened a storm that would soon sweep through the entire cabin. The cabin was still vibrating with Claire's declaration when the door at the very back opened with a soft creak. The sound was faint, almost drowned out by the hum of the engines, but loud enough to draw every eye. Passengers turned as one, phones still raised, their breaths held in anticipation. From the back, a man emerged whose sheer presence filled the narrow aisle. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a bespoke suit that fit his frame to perfection. The dim light glinted on his silver cufflinks, subtle markers of a wealth that commanded respect. His steps were calm, measured, unhurried, but each stride carried authority. Jade froze. Her smug smile vanished for the first time. She whispered to Ethan, "Who is that?" Her voice, once sharp with arrogance, now had an edge of unease. Ethan turned, his face going pale as he recognized him. He tried to hide it with irritation, but the sweat on his temples betrayed him. "You shouldn't be here," he muttered, his voice too weak to hold any power. The man stopped halfway down the aisle, his eyes sweeping over the scene. His gaze rested on Claire, soaked and trembling, but standing tall. He nodded at her, a silent gesture of respect and acknowledgement. Then his eyes shifted to Ethan and Jade. His gaze was cold, unforgiving, capable of stripping anyone of their false bravado. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said at last, his voice deep and firm, carrying effortlessly across the cabin. "Apologies for the interruption. I simply couldn't sit back and watch this farce continue any longer." The passengers leaned forward, captivated. Phones zoomed in, red lights blinking relentlessly to capture every second. He turned to Ethan. "You've forgotten who you are," he said calmly. "You think power is measured in money, in threats, in how loudly you can silence others? But real power doesn't hide behind cruelty. Real power stands up for those who can't be heard." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. His sneer was gone, his hands fidgeting with his sleeve cuff. Jade gripped his arm, whispering urgently, "Say something, don't let him take over," but her own voice was trembling. The man pulled a sleek black wallet from his pocket. With a swift motion he opened it, showing an ID that gleamed under the cabin lights. Passengers craned their necks, gasping as they saw the emblem. "My name is Alex Whitmore," he announced. "Billionaire, founder of Whitmore Industries, and the brother of the woman you tried to destroy tonight." His voice cut like steel. "She is not alone. She never was. And now the world will know the truth." The cabin erupted in whispers. Some passengers clapped softly, others shook their heads in astonishment. The phones were held closer, recording every word as evidence. Jade's face lost all color. "No, this can't be happening," she murmured, clinging to Ethan's sleeve. But he was even worse. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but no sound came out. His jaw hung slack, his confidence shattered. Alex's gaze swept over the cabin once more. "You wanted witnesses?" he said. "Now you have them, and I promise you, the world outside this jet will see everything." The cruelty, the arrogance, the betrayal. It was over. Claire's lips parted in disbelief. Relief washed over her face, mixed with exhaustion and a glimmer of hope. For the first time since the nightmare began, she felt the weight lift from her shoulders. She was no longer alone against her tormentors. The cameras kept rolling. The balance of power had shifted. The storm that began with humiliation had arrived at the moment of justice, and the presence of the billionaire brother had turned the tide completely. The moment Alex revealed his identity, the atmosphere of the cabin changed completely. What had been a theater of humiliation became a courtroom in the sky. The billionaire brother's words still echoed in the confined space, and the passengers' eyes burned with judgment. The phones remained held up, recording, capturing every angle of the collapse that was about to unfold. Ethan tried to speak. His mouth opened, but the words stumbled and died before they could leave his throat. He coughed, cleared his throat, and tried again. "This is a misunderstanding," he stammered, but his voice, once powerful, now racked, thin and unconvincing. Sweat ran down his temples, soaking his collar. He tugged at his tie as if it were strangling him. Jade clung to his arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. "Don't let him do this," she whispered fiercely. "Tell them he's lying. Tell them this is all staged." But her own voice trembled, betraying her fear. Alex stood firm, his gaze steady, his tone calm, but unyielding. Lying? Do you think I need to invent anything? He gestured to the blinking phones held by nearly every passenger. Your cruelty is already documented. Every insult, every act of violence, every arrogant laugh. You destroyed yourselves the moment you believed no one would hold you accountable. The passengers murmured in agreement. A woman near the aisle said loudly, "We saw everything." Another added, "The world is going to see this." Their words piled onto Ethan's shoulders, crushing the last vestiges of his pride. Claire sank into her seat, exhausted, but no longer broken. Relief and vindication were mingled on her face. For the first time all night, she wasn't the one cowering. She was the one being defended. The power had shifted, and she felt it in her bones. Ethan's face twisted with desperation. He turned to the passengers, raising his hands as if pleading. "You don't understand. This is my private life. None of this should matter to you." But his plea was drowned out by the constant clicking of cameras, the glare of screens recording his downfall. The mistress was the next to break. Her facade of confidence shattered like glass. She clutched at her diamond ring, shaking it in desperation. "He loves me!" she screamed. "He chose me! You can't take that away!" Her words sounded hollow, filled with panic. She looked around for support, but every gaze she met was cold, devoid of compassion. A passenger, a businessman who had been quiet until now, stood up and said firmly, "Love doesn't look like what we saw tonight. Love doesn't humiliate a pregnant woman. Love doesn't stay silent while cruelty happens." His words hit hard. A ripple of applause went through the cabin, soft at first, then stronger, until the sound filled the air. Ethan cowered under the noise, his shoulders slumped. His hand slid out of Jade's grasp. He bowed his head, unable to look at anyone. Jade shook his arm, frantic. "Say something! Do something!" But he only sat there, mute, broken, stripped of the authority he once wore like armor. Tears streamed from Jade's eyes. She furiously wiped them away, smudging her makeup into dark streaks. "This isn't fair!" she cried. "You can't do this to me!" But the truth was undeniable. The evidence was overwhelming, and justice was no longer hers to control. Alex's voice cut through her breakdown like a blade. What you called love was nothing more than cruelty and greed, and now it ends. His words silenced Jade's sobs and left Ethan trembling with shame. The passengers lowered their phones, but not their judgmental stares. They had seen enough. The judgment had played out in real time, and the verdict was clear. In that cabin, high above the clouds, the husband and mistress were no longer figures of arrogance and power. They were exposed, fragile, and defeated, and for the first time, they were the ones who trembled under the gaze of others. The jet descended steadily toward the city's bright lights, but inside the cabin, the real landing had already occurred. The power that once belonged to the husband and his mistress had vanished, stripped away in front of dozens of witnesses. The billionaire brothers' presence had changed everything, and Claire no longer sat as a victim, but as a woman who had endured and reclaimed her dignity. The passengers were still murmuring, their phones still recording, their eyes fixed on the couple who had fallen from arrogance to disgrace. Jade was slumped in her seat, makeup running, eyes red and wild. The diamond ring she had shown off so proudly minutes earlier no longer gleamed like a trophy. It looked cheap now, hollow, a symbol of betrayal more than triumph. She tried to speak, but only sobs came out, broken and sharp, like the cries of someone who finally understood the game was lost. Ethan looked even worse. His confident posture had crumbled. He was hunched over, his face pale, his hands clasped as if silently begging for the storm to pass. His tie hung loose, his shirt was damp with sweat. He was no longer a dominant figure, but an empty shell, exposed and condemned by his own actions. Claire was breathing slowly, each inhale firmer than the last. The humiliation still hung in the air, but it no longer defined her. She gently placed her hand on her belly and whispered, "We made it. We're safe now." Her words were for the child inside her, but everyone nearby could feel the weight of her victory. When the jet landed, the final act began. The door opened, and the glare of cameras flooded the cabin. Reporters had been tipped off, perhaps by passengers who sent footage before the plane even touched down. Microphones were thrust forward, voices shouted questions, and the night erupted with the sound of the truth breaking into the world. Airport security and local police entered. "Sir, you'll need to come with us," an officer said to Ethan firmly. His face went livid. He tried to protest, but the words had no force. The cameras caught every twitch of his mouth, every bead of sweat. There was no escape. 2 officers led him from the cabin as reporters shouted, "Do you have anything to say about the assault? Did you really defend your mistress over your wife?" His silence was deafening. Jade followed him, escorted under the glare of the cameras. Her tears ran down her cheeks, but no one offered her compassion. The crowd outside booed, their outrage loud and untamed. She tried to cover her face, but the cameras captured it all. Her arrogance had been reduced to nothing more than shame. Claire emerged last, gently supported by Alex. The billionaire placed a firm hand on her shoulder as the cameras turned to her. Reporters fired questions, but the lights revealed not a broken woman, but a survivor. Her wet dress clung to her. Her hair was still damp, but her eyes shone with a quiet strength. She raised her chin and spoke with clarity, her voice calm but resonant. What happened tonight was cruel, but cruelty cannot silence the truth. The truth always gets out, and tonight it got out. Her words carried across the crowd, through the microphones, broadcast onto screens. The applause that followed was soft at first, then grew until the night air trembled with support. Alex guided her through the chaos to a waiting car. As the door closed, she looked one last time at the sea of cameras. She no longer felt trapped. She felt free. The chains of silence had been broken. The final image was not the disgraced husband or the weeping mistress. It was of Claire, her hand on her belly, whispering softly to her child. "We're free." The car's headlights cut through the night as she drove away, leaving behind the broken remains of arrogance and cruelty. And in that moment, the message was clear. No amount of power, no amount of wealth, no amount of arrogance can bury the truth forever. This story of calculated revenge and justice in the air kept you hooked until the very end, so hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Alex revealed his identity as the billionaire brother, watching Ethan's face crumble as he realized he had no power. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more gripping stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.